So, Eric, I was thinking, we have created the exact vintage paperback discussion show that I always wish existed. So get ready for episode 62 of the Paperback Warrior podcast.
Welcome to the Paperback Warrior podcast. My name is Eric. I'm here with my broadcast partner, Tom. Paperback Warrior is the internet's finest resource for reviews and discussions of vintage genre fiction from the 20th century. You know, all those cool paperbacks from the 1950s and 1960s with those really attractive painted covers? Well, every day we review those books at paperbackwarrior.com, and we do this weekly podcast on Mondays where we tell you the stories behind all these old books and the people who made them possible. Now, let me throw it over to Tom, who's going to tell us what's in store for us this week. Tom?
Okay, thanks, Eric. This week, our feature will be on Charles Williford, a very creative hard-boiled author whose career spanned over 4 decades of really great fiction. I also had my road trip to Dallas, Texas to do some book hunting. I'm going to tell you about that trip. Finally, I'll be reviewing the first book in the Hoke Mosley series by Charles Williford. It's called Miami Blues, and it was released in 1984. What are you reviewing this week?
I'm going to be reviewing William Fuller's paperback titled The Pace That Kills. It's an oldie from 1956.
All right, cool. Before we delve into the feature, we have some super fans we need to thank. So why don't you do the honors, Eric?
Sure. So by way of explanation, the Paperback Warrior podcast and blog is really, it's a labor of love for us. We don't take ads, nor do we charge anybody to read or listen. Our thousands of reviews and every episode of the podcast is absolutely free to you, the listener. The only thing we ask is that if you want to support the show, please consider making a donation via PayPal through our website, paperbackwarrior.com. Up in the upper right-hand corner of the desktop version of the homepage, not the mobile version, but there's a PayPal link where you can donate if you feel so inclined. The money goes back into the show for things like web hosting, recording equipment, which we've yet to pay off, and our podcast distribution costs. Every month or so, we like to recognize the fans who donated to the show to make this show possible. So this month, we're recognizing David Kowalski, Frank Soka, Peter Robel, Den Schumann, Mark Hinton, and science fiction author extraordinaire Mike Anderle.
All right. Thanks so much, superfans. It's a lot of work putting these shows together every week, and knowing that the costs are being largely handled through your generosity is one less thing we need to worry about, so you are appreciated.
So, Tom, you went on a plane somewhere during a pandemic, of all things, for the show content. Is that right?
I did, Eric.
Wow.
Not all heroes wear capes. Actually, I needed to go to Dallas for my job, my pesky day job. So I flew there on Friday, September 11, and rented a car to do some book hunting before I started to have work that night.
Before we get into your bookstore finds, though, I want to ask you this.
Yeah, I know me.
What was it like to fly from Jacksonville, Florida, to Dallas, Texas, at this point in the COVID-19 thing?
Well, this is my first trip since the pandemic began on a plane. I've done some driving. As listeners may or may not remember, I normally travel a ton for work. So I'm one of those business traveler road warriors you see in airports with the little roller bags and all that. And when I do travel, instead of going to strip clubs, whorehouses, or golf driving ranges while on the road, I use my downtime to explore used bookstores in the cities I visit. So I used to love sharing with the listener, and you, Eric, the cities I visit and the book hunting adventures in those towns. Then COVID hit, and I've been pretty much grounded since March. So anyway, to answer your question, I flew on American Airlines. Everyone at the airport was wearing a mask, including me. The airport itself seemed fairly normal as far as crowd sizes. That may just maybe a Jacksonville, Florida thing. And I think that's because the infection numbers here have been extremely low in northern Florida. We're not a hot spot here. Actually, we never have been a hot spot here in northern Florida. Miami's had issues. The flight itself was completely full. I thought they were going to leave middle seats open for social distancing purposes, so I was looking forward to not having to arm wrestle with some 10-year-old over control of the armrest. But unfortunately, the flight was totally packed.
Well, some folks I talk to say they can't read on airplanes. Like they get distracted, or they can't stop thinking about the fact that there's literally no breakdown lane for the malfunctioning airplane to pull onto. So let me ask you, can you read on flights?
I can, and I do. I can read and sleep very well on flights.
So did you read anything on this flight?
Yeah. I reread The Hunter by Richard Stark. As the listener knows, Richard Stark's a pseudonym for Donald Westlake, and it was actually the first book in the Parker series of novels. Now, I'd read it before back in 1987 when I was 17 years old, And I've been reviewing the middle and later series installments at paperbackwarrior.com. And I thought it'd be fun to go back and read the book 35 years later to see if it held up. And I got to tell you, it sure does. It's one of the best books ever written in one of the best series titles ever.
Did everyone have masks on during the flight?
Yeah, for the most part. You could remove it if you were eating or drinking. So there were a couple people who were nursing a water very slowly, so they didn't need to wear a mask. But I just kept mine on and read quietly for the 2.5-hour flight. There was one dude I meant to tell you about it. He was wearing a full Tyvek suit with like booties and a hood and rubber gloves and a mask. And I was wondering, like, where does he think his air is coming from? You're at an airplane at 30,000 feet recirculating the air with all of us. And so there was a little feeling of anxiety, or maybe it was just me, in the air. Like we were all waiting for someone to cough and kill us all. Like I remember, I was flying on 9/11. I remember the original 9/11 and flying after that on business, when every time someone went to go take a leak, you were worried they were going to rush the cockpit and murder everybody on board.
So you got to Dallas. I mean, what did you do when you got there?
Okay, so I landed around 10:30 in the morning, and I grabbed a rental car and went to 3 bookstores, including Lucky Dog Books, based on your advice.
Oh, good.
According to their Google page, the hours are like 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Fridays, so I needed to hit that sweet spot. And I called first to ensure that they were, in fact, open and that they hadn't gone out of business during the shutdown. And I learned from experience, Eric, that you should always do that, because Google or Yelp may say that a store exists, but it ain't necessarily so. So these shops are going out of business all the time because people just aren't reading paperbacks like they used to. So I always call first. Even if the store still exists, the owner could have a runny nose and decide not to open on any random day.
So you called Lucky Dog first?
Yeah, so I called them first. They were open. So let's start with Lucky Dog. It's important to note that there are 2 Lucky Dog book locations. One is in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, and the other is in the Lockwood neighborhood of Dallas. And I went to the Lockwood one on the east side of the city. So I got to the shop, and there was a very attractive girl in her 20s working there who said that she'd been there about 2 months. The mystery fiction section was good, but it didn't have a ton for me. So I grabbed 2 early, here I got some things to show you, 2 of their early 87th Precinct novels that somehow I didn't have already. One was called Like Love, and the other is Blood Relatives. You have those?
I have so many of these, and I don't know what I have and what I don't, so I keep buying the same books over and over.
I do that too. So the Western shelves at Lucky Dog were really good. I picked up a Lauren D. Estelman Western called The High Rocks. I'm going to throw this to you as well. I know you enjoy Lauren D. Estelman's mystery work. Do you have any of his Westerns?
I do. In fact, I have this one.
Oh, you do? Okay. I was going to offer to give that to you, but in that case, I will keep it for myself, and we can race to see who reads it first.
He's a great author.
He's really something else. I went to, again, I'm really enjoying the store at this point. There wasn't a ton for me in the mystery section, but that's more a function of me having a lot of books than them not being good. But the men's adventure book room was really cool. I got a bunch of Nick Carter, Kill Masters that I didn't already have. I was trying to focus on the ones by John Messman because I really enjoy his writing. And I did something I don't normally do. I went to the science fiction room, and I picked up a book for you. I'm going to hand this to you, called After Things Fell Apart by Ron Goulart from 1970. Let me throw that to you. It looked like a post-apocalyptic novel, which I know is your jam, and the book was blurbed by Philip K. Dick, who said it was a sheer delight to read. So here you go, my gift to you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. There's a guy on the cover that's wearing a coonskin cap like Davy Crockett. He's holding a musket beside of a woman who's looks like the Baroness, and she's got an M16 machine gun. So
yeah, Ron Goulart's a real good author, so I can imagine that's a good book. And if you take a look at the font, it's really big.
I see that.
Oh, in fact, I got a complaint from a listener saying we shouldn't call it the font, we should call it the typeface.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, well, guess what? Request denied. The font's really big.
Okay.
I liked Lucky Dog books a lot. And I'll post pictures of my haul on the Facebook page. I got 19 books for $40, so that's a pretty fair deal.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so based on a suggestion from another listener who heard the show, I went to a used bookstore in Denton, Texas, about 35 miles northwest of Dallas. The store is called Recycled Books, Records, and CDs. Doesn't really roll off the tongue.
No.
But they had an entire shelf of what they called pulp paperbacks, most of which were in bags and many of which were priced high, some of which were priced very low and reasonable. I actually liked Recycled Books, we'll call it, even better than Lucky Dog. But I have to admit, they did not have a traditional men's adventure section. So I got 15 books for about $60, or about $4 a book. And every one of the books I got looks amazing to me. I'll post photos of the haul on the Facebook page, but let me highlight a couple titles. And I want to throw these to you so you can take a look at them. Okay, so this first one I want to talk about is a 1952 paperback called Warrant for a Wanton by Michael Gillian. I don't know much about him, but it has a fun premise. So the premise is a wrongfully accused guy escapes death row and needs to establish his innocence while he's on the run. That's a plot that's been done a million times before. But the cool thing about this one that just cracks me up, I was talking to Paul Bishop about this, is that the main character gets his hands on some sodium pentothal, and he goes around stabbing suspects with a hypodermic needle full of the chemical to make them tell the truth while he's interrogating them.
Unbelievable.
So I have no idea if it's any good, but it sounds just absolutely fun as hell.
Hey, real fast, what do you know about pennant books? I don't know if I've ever seen a pennant book.
I've seen them around. I don't know anything about them. A lot of them have that same art style.
Okay.
I'm sure it's an artist that is very important to know about that I don't know. I have no idea who it is. So I get this graphic books mystery here from 1956 called The Corpse Next Door by John Ferris, a name that you might know because he became a successful horror author later in his career. I liked his hard case crime reprint, Baby Mall, and so this one was an easy purchase.
On page 7, someone's marked in pencil, "This is good."
All right, well, I appreciate their review. And if I went through like Jules Burt does with an eraser, erasing all those things, I'd probably have a full-time job on my hands.
Yes.
So I sent you a photo of the shelves as I was going through them, and you said you wanted a copy of The Slasher by Ovid Damaris.
Oh, fun, yeah.
Okay, so while I was buying it for you, the clerk noticed that the paperback is actually split entirely in half, and he gave it to me for free.
Oh, wow.
So you got it. Did you read that and review that one already?
No, but I've really fallen in love with this author here lately. I struck out on the very first experience I had with him, which was The Extortioner. I think it was Extortioner or Executioner, something like that. But I reviewed it on the blog, and I didn't like it. But since then, I've really liked some of his stuff. So,
all right, well, you could probably still read it. If not, I may actually have a copy of that somewhere you can borrow. But at least the cover is in mint condition, so you could stare at that all you want for free. The store, again, is Recycled Books, Records, and CDs in Denton, Texas. And if you're looking for old paperback originals from the 1950s, it's awesome. If you're looking for like Mac Bolan and Death Merchant books, there's probably nothing there for you. My last stop on the tour was Half Price Books. Now, we have a lot of foreign listeners. Half Price Books is a chain of used bookstores with 127 locations in 17 U.S. states. The first store was established in 1972 in a former laundromat in Dallas. So there's a bunch of half-price books locations scattered around Dallas, but the one I'm told to hit is their flagship store. It's 55,000 square feet. There's a cafe in there. Maybe there's a discotheque. I don't know. It's huge. So I was there around 7 years ago on a business trip when I lived in Hawaii, and that's where I bought my very first Gunsmith adult Western paperback by Robert Randisi. He wrote those under the name J.R. Roberts. I loved it so much I ended up buying hundreds more of those in the series, and I still enjoy that series to this day. So returning to this flagship half-price bookstore in 2020 felt like it'd be a real homecoming for me. Now, before I tell you what happened, what's your experience with half-price books? We don't have any in Florida for some reason, but you've been to at least one, right?
Right, yeah. I've been to a few locations. I don't have a lot of success there. I don't know why, but normally I just go right to the spinner rack that they always seem to have in the corner of each store, which is normally dedicated to vintage paperbacks that we like. I think 2 years ago I went to the one in Cincinnati, and last year I think I did Atlanta. I did Texas last year, and then I did Atlanta the year before.
Yeah, no, half-price books is good. They suffer from what every used bookstore suffers from. They can only carry inventory of what's being sold to them by other people. So they have to wait for like an old man to die and his widow to sell them all the books from the 1950s and 60s, and then you and I are in business.
Right.
So I get to the store, and there just wasn't much there for me. I got 2 books and a couple graphic novels for my son. The book I'm interested in reading that I wanted to show you is called The Vendetta by Nick Quarry. Nick Quarry, of course, is a pseudonym for, quick, do you know?
Marvin Albert.
Yes, Marvin Albert, who also wrote as Albert Conroy. It's a 1973 book, and it's one of those books packaged to look like a Godfather ripoff.
Yeah.
Although the plot synopsis reads more like an Executioner ripoff. A waiter's family is mistakenly killed by mobsters, and the waiter launches his one-man war on the mafia hierarchy.
Hey, on this one, this is the first time I've ever seen this.
Yeah.
It's a falsic gold medal, right?
Yeah.
But on the cover, it says, from the publishers of The Godfather.
I wonder if The Godfather was a gold medal book originally by Mario Puzo.
Apparently it was.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they couldn't say that if it wasn't true, or they could end up going to book jail. Anyway, that's probably enough of my travelogue settlement. We should move on to the feature unless you've got something to add, do you?
I don't have anything.
All right, then let's do the feature. Give me some mood music, please. All right, so I'm excited about this feature today because Charles Willeford authored some of my favorite hard-boiled novels of the 20th century, and he lived a pretty interesting life. So let's get into that first. Charles Willeford was born in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1919. His dad died of tuberculosis when he was 3, and his mom moved to California to be closer to family. Then his mom died when he was 8, and he was functionally an orphan living with his grandma in Los Angeles. So he left town in 1932 when he was 13 years old. And this was during the Great Depression, and he became a teenage hobo, riding the rails and drifting around the U.S.-Mexican border for a year at age 13. You got a daughter who's like 13, right?
Right.
Can you imagine her riding the rails on the U.S.-Mexican border for a year?
That's crazy.
It is crazy. So in 1935, I can't get over this. At age 15, he joined the California National Guard and then the U.S. Army. All indications are that he lied about his age to get into the Army. Nevertheless, teenage Charles is now a soldier. And the Army stations him in the Philippines, where he becomes a fire truck driver, a cook, and a gas truck driver. He leaves the Army in 1938, only to re-enlist the next year. At that time, he's assigned to the Presidio in Monterey, California. You ever been there?
No.
It's really nice. It's like serving in a screensaver. It's so beautiful. It's a fantastic place to visit. So anyway, while stationed there, Charles cared for horses belonging to the U.S. Cavalry. He also qualified as a marksman with a machine gun, so he's learning some very useful life skills. In 1942, Charles gets married, and he gets sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, where he joins the infantry in a tank battalion. It's 1942, so it's time for World War II, and Charles is shipped out to Europe, where he fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and he earned both the Bronze Star and the Silver Star for acts of bravery during the war. Now, after the war, he gets sent home, and then he re-enlists again in 1945. So between 1947 and 1949, he was stationed in occupied Japan, where he ran the radio station on the military base. And in 1948, he had his first book published. It was a book of poetry, Eric, called Proletarian Laughter. Have you ever read it?
No.
Yeah, me neither. Not much for poetry here. Anyway, he divorced his first wife in 1949. I'm guessing the divorce had nothing to do with that sweet, sweet poetry money that was probably rolling in the door. He left the Army in 1949 and became a grad student studying art history at the University of Lima, Peru. The problem with being a graduate student is that you must have an undergraduate college degree, and before that, a high school diploma, and Charles had neither. Once the Peruvian university got hip to that, they tossed him out, and he found himself unemployed in New York City in late 1949. Now, rather than go hungry, Charles Williford does what he always did when times got rough. He rejoined the U.S. military. At that time, he was in the Air Force, where he was stationed at Hamilton Air Force Base near San Francisco. So as he's serving in California, Charles is talking about how much he wants to write a book. And his military buddies basically shamed him into actually writing a novel. He went into San Francisco, into the town every weekend, holed up somewhere, probably in a hotel, with a typewriter, and he wrote his first book. It was a very thin novel called The High Priest of California, and it was finally published in 1953 as half of a double novel paperback. It was the B-side with a reprint of 1939's Talbot Mundy adventure, Full Moon. Now, it wasn't an ace double. It was a double by a company called Royal Books that was trying to do the same thing. Now, I read High Priest of California a million years ago as an ebook, but it might have actually even been before the Kindle was invented when I was reading ebooks on my Palm Pilot. A Paperback Warrior superfan asked me to reread it and review it for the site, and I intend to do that, but I haven't gotten it to it yet. I remember it's about a violent and twisted used car salesman who beds down a lot of babes, as I recall. When Williford wrote the book, he thought it would be a perfect Fawcett Gold Medal novel, but when he sent it to Fawcett, they rejected it, saying it was too weird. And having books that are just a little too weird is going to be a recurring theme for Charles Williford. The book was rejected by a bunch of other paperback houses before he successfully sold it to Universal Publishing and Distributing, the parent company of Royal Books. So Royal Books prints 150,000 copies of the book, but it only sells 55,000 copies. So it was not a huge commercial success at a time when paperback original novels were this huge new entertainment form. So the next book he wrote and sold while he was still in the military was called Pickup. It was published in 1955 by a sleaze publisher called Beacon, which was also owned by that same company, Universal Publishing. Now, I did read and review Pickup at Paperback Warrior, and I'm going to piss off a lot of listeners today by telling you the truth that the book sucked. Now, people like this book, but don't listen to them. They're wrong. It's they're crazy.
Geez.
It's a terrible book. Pickup is about a short order cook named Harry who's a drunk. He meets a girl named Helen who's also a drunk. They're both rather stupid, kind of low IQ characters, and they fall madly in love with each other as they try to drink themselves to death together. It was a little bit like that Nicolas Cage movie, Leaving Las Vegas, but nowhere near as cheery and entertaining. It was also a little bit like a David Goodis novel, but Goodis usually thrusts his losers and bums and alcoholics into some sort of crime fiction dilemma, but Williford never really did that. Pickup was well written, but not much happens in it. It's certainly not a crime novel. Now, but see, what people actually love about this book, Eric, is the last line of the novel. Williford throws the reader a twist in the last line of the book that's supposed to stay with you forever and make you reread the book with a whole new perspective.
Okay, so I got to know this then. Do you want to spoil it by telling us what's the final line? I got to know now.
I know. Maybe I'll tell you off. It's tempting, and I'll tell you off the air, but I just can't do that. It would be unethical, and I invite the reader to check it out and tell me their thoughts, because people think I'm crazy because people like this book, and they shouldn't. But I'm not going to ruin it for people. I will grant that the twist ending probably packed a bigger punch in 1955 than it does today, and so maybe I'll just leave it at that. The book, again, is called Pickup by Charles Willeford. When he wrote the book, it was originally titled Until I Am Dead. It may or may not have been reprinted under that name. So anyway, the next book he wrote and got published was Wild Wives, which was published in 1956 as a double, repaired with his first book, High Priest of California. So they're kind of giving High Priest of California another opportunity in the market, paired with his new novel, Wild Wives. Now, I did read Wild Wives, and I reviewed it at Paperback Warrior, and it was so good. It was one of the best crime noir novels I've ever read. The setup for Wild Wives is super simple. It's a San Francisco private eye. He's hired by a woman basically to run interference for her so she can be free of the goons that her father hired to keep an eye on her. He basically needs to help her shake a surveillance tail for a couple days. It's such a basic setup for a private eye novel. But then things take a turn that I'm not going to spoil here into this amazing femme fatale noir novel. His writing was so good and the story was so cool. Listener, please do yourself a favor and read Wild Wives by Charles Willeford. It's been reprinted for $1 on your Kindle. I promise that you can afford this. It's just a damn masterpiece. Again, it's Wild Wives by Charles Willeford from 1956. This book is amazing.
That's saying something considering the amount of crime noir that you've read.
Yeah, no, this one was really special. It jumped out at me and I still think about it to this day. Well, while he was still in the military, Willeford kept selling books to Beacon. There was a book called Honey Gal, which is also released under the title of Black Mass for Brother Springer. Another 1958 book is called Lust is a Woman. He wrote it with the title called Made in Miami. I don't know much about it. The tagline is, "She was a pawn in an evil game. The story of Maria, who wanted desperately to become a movie star." It was another Beacon Books release, so I'm assuming it's another very well-written sleaze-ish novel. The book was reprinted in 2008 under Williford's original title, Made in Miami. I don't know much about it. I know my timeline here is getting a little screwy, but Willeford ends up leaving active duty in the military in 1956 to pursue writing full-time. How many of his late 1950s books were written while he was in the military versus shortly thereafter, I just don't know. What we do know, though, is that in the 1950s, he still wasn't making enough money to survive as a writer. These sleaze publishing houses did not pay much. It was like $500 a book, maybe $1,000. So he gets jobs. He becomes a professional boxer. He becomes a horse trainer, a radio announcer to make ends meet. Meanwhile, he's still writing and submitting his books to publishers, and he even went to France for a little bit to study painting. So let's get to the year 1960. Willeford attends classes at Palm Beach Junior College and gets an associate's degree. That same year, he sells his book, The Woman Chaser, to Beacon. Now, his original title was The Director, but it's been reprinted a ton of times as The Woman Chaser. So Stick with that title. Now, I read and reviewed Woman Chaser on Paperback Warrior, and I really like the book, but I have to say it's not a crime novel per se. It's about the smooth-talking Los Angeles used car salesman who aspires to be a screenwriter and a director in Hollywood. He's a really good schemer, and he comes up with some interesting gambits to get his movie made. The real appeal of The Woman Chaser is Williford's writing. It's narrated by the car salesman, and it's one of those books where the narrator acknowledges that he's writing the book that you are reading. I like it when they do that. There's a real meta quality to it because the narrator who is supposedly writing this book is just this colorful and sort of unreliable character. You don't know if what he's telling you is the truth about what happened. You should definitely read it, listener. Just don't expect a hard-boiled crime novel. Again, that one's called The Woman Chaser from Charles Willeford from 1960. So in 1960, Williford relocates to Florida, specifically Miami, where he attends University of Miami, and he finally gets the bachelor's degree he wanted. And in 1962, he gets a master's degree in 1964. While he's getting his degree, he sells a book called Understudy for Love in 1961, sold to another sleaze publisher called Newsstand Library. Now, for that book, he received an advance of $500 and royalties of 1 penny per book sold. So not much money. So same year in 1961, Williford finally sells a book to Fawcett Gold Medal. Now, it's sort of weird because the book was called Whip Hand, and it was released under the name of W. Franklin Sanders. Now, his original title for that book was Deliver Me from Dallas. I have it, but I haven't read it. Do you have that book?
No.
Okay. It's about an L.A. cop who gets threatened and takes off to Dallas, where he stumbles into a murder-kidnapping plot involving a woman in Dallas. It looks like it's right up my alley, and I will read and review it. Now, I've heard that W. Franklin Sanders, the pseudonym that was used, was a real person and a friend of Williford's. The story I heard was that Williford ghost-wrote the novel for his friend to have published under Sanders' name. I also heard rumors that Whip Hand or Deliver Me from Dallas was a trunk novel that Williford had actually written back in 1952, never sold, and he dusted it off when he finally sold it to Fawcett Gold Medal under his buddy's name. The upshot is that I don't know if Whip Hand was a hit or not for Fawcett Gold Medal, but if it was, it really didn't do Williford a damn bit of good because he was back to selling his novels to sleaze publishers for like no money soon thereafter. Same thing happened in 1962 where he sold two books, No Experience Necessary and another book called Cockfighter to low-end publishers at the $500 rate. I've heard really good things about Cockfighter, and I intend to read that and review it. I think it's literally about cockfighting. While he's in school in Miami, he lands a job as an associate editor at Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, and he's able to do that job by the mail from Florida. So he was a very early kind of work-from-home kind of dude.
Right.
So Cockfighter gets published in 1962, and Williford doesn't have another book published for 9 years. He stays in Miami teaching humanities classes at the University of Miami through 1967. Then he moves over to Miami-Dade Community College teaching English and philosophy. So let's pause this story to make some observations, Eric. Charles Williford today is regarded as crime-noir fiction royalty. But we're up to 1971 in his life story. At this point of the story, he's been at it for 20 years, and he's made virtually no money for his books thus far.
I'm shocked that he actually stayed with a writing gig. I mean, considering he was being rejected by all the bigger publishers and being rejected by Fawcett Gold Medal numerous times, which obviously was a goal of his, it had to be really frustrating. And I was thinking at the same time, though, think about this, though. You're, 35 years old, and you can walk around a college campus and just say that you wrote a bunch of books, and you have proof that you've published these books. I mean, he's got to get a lot of tail.
Yeah,
on the college scene.
Miami, hello. Yeah,
he's writing books. He's getting them published.
It's also, to me, it'd be such a pleasure to have a writing teacher who was a published author who had like 5 or 6 published books, even if they were just pulp fiction. I would have so much more respect for that author as being able to give me advice than some egghead professor who only publishes in like English literary journals.
One more thing on the Fawcett Gold Medal, do you think that maybe they agreed to publish this book under the other name, maybe because they were weary of all the books that he wrote as sleaze? Do you think maybe they were just turned off by that?
I think he fooled him. I think that this book was submitted under the name of W. Franklin Saunders, and this W. Franklin Saunders acted and pretended like he was the author, and they sold the book on that. I don't know if every subsequent book after the early rejections from Fawcett Gold Medals, if he even submitted them to them and they got rejected.
Right.
At some point, he probably just figured they weren't worth his time, or it was something aspirational. But it is interesting to see that he finally was able to get it published, but it was under his buddy's name.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the Fawcett Gold Medal was just, they look at it and just go kind of snooty and say, that's he's got a bad name on the circuit.
Yeah,
with all
you're right. I mean, because a lot of
sleaze.
They did have a lot of authors who went into the sleaze world, like Gil Brewer and stuff. But usually they started at Fawcett Gold Medals and then fell off when their quality fell off. Anyways, let's go to 1971. While he's teaching at the community college, Williford sells a book called The Burnt Orange Heresy. Some say it's actually his best noir novel. I have not read it. It's supposed to be his most literate novel as well. It's about this despicable art critic. My impression is that it was not a big hit at the time. Oddly, it has just recently been made into a movie in 2020. It was supposed to get a theatrical release, but that did not happen because of COVID-19. A lot of movies suffered that fate. But it's available streaming on video right now, and it's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with a 65 rating. The audience liked it a little more and has given it an 81 rating. The cast has Donald Sutherland and a young upstart singer who's been trying to make it in Hollywood by the name of Mick Jagger.
Okay.
So it may be good. I mean, I'd probably want to read the book first, but that's a movie I might check out. Williford also wrote a hardcover novel called The Hombre from Sonora under the pseudonym of Will Charles, also published in 1971. His original title for that one is The Difference. I know nothing about that book, I'm sorry to report. My impression is that neither of these 1971 books were any kind of hit. He kept teaching at the community college and stopped writing, or at least publishing, for the next 13 years. All this brings us up to 1984, when he released his first novel starring a Miami cop named Hoke Mosley called Miami Blues. And for the first time in his life, he had a hit on his hands. The book was later adapted into a 1990 movie starring Fred Ward as Hoke Mosley and a young Alec Baldwin, totally miscast, although he did a good job in the movie, as the ex-con villain of the story. And now I'm going to review that book at the end of the episode, but the important thing to understand for the story of Charles Williford is that book was a hit. And so 3 more novels followed in the Hoke Mosley series: New Hope for the Dead, Sideswipe, and The Way We Die Now. The Way We Die Now was his 1988 book, and he received an advance of $225,000 for that one, the largest advance in his career. So after a lifetime of writing, Williford finally had the commercial success and fans who loved him, including Elmore Leonard saying nice things about him. So what does Williford do to celebrate his new success? He dies of a heart attack on March 27, 1988.
Man.
And he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, where America's military heroes are laid to rest. It's also the burial place of President John F. Kennedy. Again, I know we have some foreign fans. And if you like the hard-boiled writing style with quirky characters and excellent writing, you're probably really going to enjoy Charles Williford. His books can be weird, but he was always an excellent writer. So that's pretty much what I got. I want to thank the Encyclopedia of Pulp Fiction Writers by Lee Server for providing me with some valuable biographical insights into Charles Williford. I also consulted Wikipedia and Paperback Confidential by Brian Ritt as I was doing my research. So, Eric, why don't you go ahead and do your review, and then we'll circle back to Charles Williford.
All right, great. So, as promised, I'm covering William Fuller's paperback, The Pace That Kills. It was originally published by Dell in 1956. And, Tom, I got a little frustrated about halfway through this book, but not necessarily because it was a bad book. The reason was...
Sex scenes? I know they make you frustrated.
Yeah, they really do. The reason for my frustration in this one was that in researching the author and planning the review, I discovered that The Pace That Kills is a sequel to Fuller's 1954 novel Backcountry.
Oh, I hate that. It makes me so frustrated when I find out. Were there like references to the events of the first book and the second book?
Apparently so. Have you ever just bailed out at that point, or do you just continue going forward?
Depends how deep I'm into it when I realize that. If I was reading for my own enjoyment, I'd probably bail, but because I have this gun to my head of having to produce this X number of reviews per week for you, yes. I'll just soldier on.
All right. Well, here's a scoop on William Fuller. About all the information I could really gain on this guy was that he was a merchant seaman, an infantryman, he was a drifter, and then he became a full-time novelist in the 1950s. His claim to fame, though, was the 6-book series of crime-noir novels starring a Miami playboy named Brad Dolan, and he just kind of drifts along the Florida coast in a houseboat. Tom, you read and reviewed one of the Brad Dolan books, and you stated you were entertained enough to seek out additional series installments. But aside from the Brad Dolan series, I can only find 2 other books that Fuller wrote. The aforementioned Backcountry, which was published in 1954, and this novel from 1956. So The Pace That Kills is just set northwest of the Florida Everglades. It's in an area known as the 10,000 Islands. In the beginning of the book, 2 cops are driving along this rural stretch of swampy highway, and they've got these 2 captives in the back seat, and they're headed to prison. But one of them is a guy named Danny Rivers, and after a tire blows, Rivers and the other guy, they're able to overtake the cops, and they run into the swamp with the cops' pistols. So after this exciting opener, the book really sort of slows down. The author introduces readers to Danny Rivers' tiny hometown, and the reason is because Rivers, he's headed that way to settle old scores that landed him in jail in the first place. I would imagine that the events are the emphasis behind the Backcountry novel. It probably tells why Rivers is in jail and some of the things that he did. But the main characters in this book are Harry, who's a motel and restaurant owner, his alcoholic wife Marge, and Harry's brand new waitress. She's a gorgeous drifter named June. And there's a dozen or so other characters, and some are married, and they all have secret affairs going, and the whole thing, I don't know, it just starts looking like Peyton Place or something. And I was having an okay time just reading about the town's characters and all their mannerisms and how each of them connected. But eventually I just wanted to get to a gritty, violent revenge book, like a heist or a murder mystery or something that could provide a satisfactory plot line. But the book is really just kind of like a Southern Gothic, and it resembles Thornton Wilder's Our Town. If it was written by like somebody like Paul Kane or Erskine Caldwell. Rivers eventually returns home, and he's got the guns, and he's facing the people that he got a vendetta against. But it doesn't really develop. Instead, the author's more impressed with really just introducing characters, showing how they connect, and not really doing a whole lot with the story. I wanted the events to eventually come to fruition on why he was in jail, and there is a heist of sorts, and there's some money thrown around in a secret location. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot going on. I don't know if I would search Backcountry out and try to read it. But anyway, that's The Pace That Kills by William Fuller.
Yeah, I remember liking that Brad Dolan book enough, but not like, oh my God, this is Mother's Milk. I must read everything he's ever written. But
right.
When I see his books around, I pick them up just because there's lovely covers, and
yes.
You never know. So let's go back to Charles Williford. I want to review the first of the 4 Hoke Mosley books. It's called Miami Blues from 1984. It's about Miami police homicide detective Hoke Mosley, and it opens with him responding to an airport crime scene involving a dead Hare Krishna who bothered the wrong traveler and paid the price. We also meet Freddie Fenger Jr., a freshly released ex-con ripped with muscle. This is a guy who lifted weights in prison 6 hours a day, which is why when I watched the preview of Miami Blues, the movie, and saw skinny little Alec Baldwin played him, I know that they had changed an essential part of it. Because throughout the whole book, Freddie Fenger's physical, intimidating size is a real factor. Anyway, he's the one responsible for killing the Hare Krishna, and I won't give away the opening scene where he does that, but it's really interesting and kind of played for laughs. The story basically toggles between Hoke's investigation and Freddie becoming an established resident of Miami with an expertise in strong-arm robberies. The characters of Miami Blues are really colorful and vivid. In Florida, Freddie quickly finds himself a girlfriend who's a dimwit prostitute named Susan, whose professional name is Pepper. And watching their relationship quickly slide into dysfunction was absolutely fascinating reading. Miami Blues isn't a mystery at all because it's you keep toggling between the good guy and the bad guys. There's no whodunit. But it's a really propulsive thriller that sets up this violent confrontation at the novel's climax and really delivers the goods when the time is right. There's this gritty and raw feel to Williford's early work that's replaced by the smooth readability of Miami Blues. It's clear that the author was trying to emulate the quirky Elmore Leonard vibe, and I thought Williford achieved that goal with additional edginess and political incorrectness and hard-boiled violence. I think that Miami Blues far outshines Elmore Leonard's Florida crime novels in quality, despite the fact that Leonard made way more money with his inferior products. But make no mistake, Williford is the real deal, and Miami Blues is one of the best books I've devoured this year. It is a very quick and breezy read, and I can't wait to get into the rest of the series, so don't sleep on this one. Highest recommendation. Now, Eric, do you got time for a weird side story?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so Williford wrote Miami Blues, and it was a hit. And so his literary agent tells him, go write a sequel. And so he writes a second Hoke Mosley book called Grim Haven. In the second book, Hoke Mosley goes crazy. He slaughters his own daughters and winds up in solitary confinement. So it's not a great recipe for a long-lasting series. So he finishes Grim Haven. He sends it to his agent, who says under no circumstances will he even send this book to the publisher. Go back to the drawing board and write a proper sequel, which of course he did. And as a result, Grim Haven was never published. Now, this is where it gets interesting, Eric. The original manuscript for Grimhaven still exists. A photocopy of it is stored at the Charles Willeford Archive, where his papers are kept, at the Broward County Library, just 5 hours south of here in Miami. The Grimhaven manuscript is 212 typed pages. Now, Betsy Williford, the author's second wife and widow, is worried that the book is going to leak and has asked that the library not allow patrons to photocopy the manuscript for fear that it will end up being sold on eBay. Now, what if you and I, Eric, were to drive down there to the library, get the manuscript, and just take photos of every page on our iPhones? It probably won't take more than an hour, right? Then we'll have the manuscript, and we can do whatever we want with it. Because, Eric, there's no book police, right?
That was such a seductive voice that you just used. It was like
I'm the devil on your shoulder.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking the whole time. I mean, it would be a really fun road trip, I think, and we could hit a bunch of bookstores on the way. But I think you've been reading too many heist novels. And we could end up in civil court, too, which wouldn't be fun. And then our generous listeners are going to have to foot the bill for all of our attorneys.
All right, fair enough. I suppose that if Williford couldn't make much money from his books while he was alive, it's unlikely that stealing and pirating his rejected manuscript is going to be our ticket to financial independence anyway. I'd still like to read it one day. Plus, I heard that there are already bootleg copies floating around on the internet, and it looks like others may have discovered my diabolical plan first. So anyway, I guess that's all I got on Williford, and I think we're probably running out of time. So why don't you wrap up the show?
Yeah, definitely. Let me ask you a question, though.
Yeah.
The last line of Pickup, I think I know what it is. The main character is a ghost the whole time.
I cannot confirm or deny.
Okay.
I mean, believe it or not, you're kind of warm.
Okay. Wow. All right, listeners, I tried. I really did.
All right. Wrap up the show.
Yeah, so that's it for this episode of the podcast. Join us every day at paperbackwarrior.com for reviews of great and awful old books, and follow us on Facebook to join along with the conversation. Until next week, this is Eric on behalf of Tom signing off.
Be cool.